Robert Rush said on his blog that he thinks a constitutional amendment is about the only way to undo all of this mess. What do you think of that?
I wouldn't say it's the only way, but it is the final step, and we will have to do it eventually. But there are authorities that the states are granted under the Constitution that we should take advantage of, which is why 2 years ago we passed the most comprehensive disclosure law in the country, died in the House. But I'm to the point now where you're going to have to start to speak to the ability of states to act on their own, and then let us test those decisions in court all the way to the Supreme Court. I do think there's some room for that, and I think states need to assert their own authority under the Constitution. So that's why we passed that bill. So I think you got to do both. And otherwise you're just going to be chasing one tail and not all of them. And that's been the challenge with these kind of laws.
Anyone else? Rick, did you want to say anything special?
No. It's fine.
Bless your heart. And thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
I really
Thank you. Appreciate being here.
Yeah, thank you. The thing that we all need to remember is that we're not done here today. We've got a lot of work ahead of us, and Jeff has laid it out very nicely. I think what we have to do here in Iowa is be as supportive as we can of our candidates and make sure that the folks in our districts are supportive in the House. Particularly, we need to get the culture changed there. And it doesn't have, you don't have to be a Democrat to support this. Nobody is going to lose by having the rules changed. It's all going to be for the better of everybody, particularly for regular folks like us. So,
I really believe it will be an emerging bipartisan issue.
thank you.
I'm seeing it in some of the polls that are out there when you ask about campaign finance. It gains roughly 70 to 80% support based on the ideas that you present. So I really think this is an emerging bipartisan issue. And it only takes that next experience for a voter to say, wow, there really was that much money involved. And I can't even figure out some of the other money that's out there. All that takes is that experience to mount, and I think it turns into a bipartisan issue fairly quickly.
What seems like one of the issues that's maybe pivoting this a little, changing a little bit, is the fact that some Republicans who might have been very much in favor of that money have now been primaried by people who have even more money than they do and have lost. So all of a sudden this has been turned back on as a weapon, and there's some suggestion that they say, you know, this is a wake-up call, that this could hurt them as well as them.
We're all losers.
Everybody.
If an election can simply be determined by how much money is spent, we're all losers when
No
that
matter
happens.
what group you're from.
And so it all comes home to roost, regardless of your party. And you know, I'd like to have people in the chamber who are thoughtful, who know they have the support of the voters back home, and who don't have to think about how much money during the campaign actually affects the outcome. Which is why I also favor public financing. So there's a number of tools that we can look at, but it has to be our own effort and advocacy to make those things a reality. Because the Supreme Court is clearly not going to help us. We used to say Citizens United was the worst Supreme Court decision in the last decades. Well, they added insult to injury, so now we're going to have to lengthen that list a little more and add the McCutcheons.
The Citizens United, the Public Citizens folks have been calling it Citizens United on steroids. So.
Yes. Yes. And keep in mind, most awareness of the voters is just now emerging. For example, here in Iowa, we had the first local elections, mayor and city council, where secret dark money came in. It was Coke money in Coralville. Remember? So now that cohort of voters, that area of voters kind of went, oh, wait a minute, this is real. For most of us that have followed Citizens United since 2010, we could have predicted what was going to happen. But the sad part is most voters haven't been exposed to that kind of money and that kind of influence in a lot of the races, but it won't take long for that to happen.
A lot of local politicians aren't exposed to it yet. They don't realize that it's an issue on every level because, yes, they say that, you know, I was speaking with one of our city council members and saying that just because it affected someone else. She doesn't see why it's an issue.
Well, it goes back to the roots of democracy, which is the ability for people's voices to matter when those elections occur. And if it's all about money, then we know that that's not the case then, right? Your voice really doesn't matter if it's just about the price tag of the election.
There's a good
Well, it
saying.
drives down voter participation, and that really does affect the democracy. And if you think about what the Republican backers did in terms of the presidential race, they put almost $1 billion in, and they didn't really get a lot for their investment. And so they're focusing downward to state and local ballots, where $1 billion goes a long way. I mean, it really does. A few million here and there across this state make a fundamental difference in the makeup of the Senate, of the House, or any state race.
Exactly. I think it only gets worse if we don't get proactive and change some of the laws.
Jeff's right. The instance at Coralville this last year, you know, there were folks that were totally surprised by it. The ones that were clued in were horrified and were very clear about how they didn't want to have any part of that. We know that in one of the city council races right here in Des Moines, there was an big outside group from out of the state that brought money in to help a candidate. Luckily, he was
Defeated?
not able to utilize that to his best, ability, and so the incumbent was able to stay in. But
Well, I
it
think he
is
came out-
affecting local.
Didn't he come out later and say he didn't even really want the support of
And he
that
might-
outside organization?
That's easy to say after the fact.
Yes.
But, yeah, because he's in that profession, so he had to know about it. But on some level.
The upside of the Coralville example is that the community saw clearly what was happening.
Yes.
And reacted to it. So there will be those of us, that there will be opponents of our position for better campaign finance laws that will point to the Coralville example and say, well, we don't really need this because look, they knew what was going on, they voted that way. But keep in mind, city election like Coralville was very isolated. It had a lot of media attention on that specific topic. In a lot of the other campaigns, that all gets lost in the ether and the noise of hundreds of campaigns going on at the same time. So we clearly know that significant amounts of money in short periods of time, when the voters don't have the ability to know that and react to it, influence the elections. And that's what this is really about. You cannot be an informed democracy without that information being readily available and known as it informs your vote when you go into the ballot box. And that's what all these campaign reform ideas are about. If you've noticed, we've almost stopped talking about caps and limits, right? The McCutcheon case highlighted those today, but for the most part, we're just after disclosure and the ability to know at this point because of what happened with Citizens United. Now, the McCutcheon case blows the caps off of that and allows super empowered billionaires to spend more money broadly across the campaigns. And but think about that. Nobody was really talking about caps until today. And now we've got a whole other layer to think about. Until we get active and get enough people to vote because they care about campaign finance issues in addition to all the other things that they care about, jobs and education and healthcare, this has to rise on that priority list, which is why I've been a strong advocate in the Senate for us speaking to those issues. So you should be proud of your Iowa Senate. We've taken every example when we saw something related to campaign finance and offered thoughtful policy to Iowans. We just need partners in the other chamber.
And
We're
we
lucky
need
to keep on having the Senate be Democratic, and we have to really hope that it's going to work again and work hard to make sure that it stays a Democratic. What worries me is that even if you get a big turnout in an election, when it comes time to pass the laws, the people who have accepted huge amounts of money from the big corporations and now from individuals listen too often to that money, and so we've been getting the kind of laws that the big corporations want. Even trying to pass a campaign finance reform law gets to be very difficult now because big corporations don't want campaign finance reform.
And just
They
as-
like what they've got now. I do know we need to keep on doing this, though. I like Saul Alinsky's quote. He says, the only way you're going to trump organized money is with organized people.
Yeah,
And
I
the
agree.
time may come, but we are so far behind because the same amount of money in the 2010 election made sure, the people that were giving the money made sure that the state legislatures would get to be more and more conservative. Because every 10 years there is
Redistricting.
redistricting. There's you have the, oh God, I'm having a senior moment.
After
You
the
have-
census.
You have the census, and then the redistrict, with the very conservative people that got elected in 2010, you have too many places around the country where they've arranged it so that the conservatives are going to win. And we have so much work to do. We can't be discouraged, but yet it's so difficult.
No, there's,
I'd like some good examples of people that are good spokesmen on this, because I think those spokesmen are going to have to keep rallying people. And I know you are one here in the state.
I agree. There's two things. There's good people on both sides of the aisle. You didn't see Senator McCain's quote today on the McCutcheon decision. You should read it. Google it, try to find it. I mean, to me, it's not lost on me that one of our national leaders who literally spent time in prisoner of war camps protected everybody's ability to vote in our democracy. He is a Republican, but I think on this issue he's right. He's tried to have laws that understand the influence of money in politics and do something about it. So he's deeply concerned about the McCutcheon decision today as well. In addition, this is another reason to be proud Iowans. We do not gerrymander in Iowa in our redistricting process. We have the best in the nation law.
Yes.
It
The
is
League of
net-
Women Voters helped to get
The
that.
League of Women Voters, most people don't know, were the ones that brokered that deal behind the scenes in conjunction with the Supreme Court. But think about this, that law's been on the books for over 4 decades in Iowa, and it's never been duplicated in another state. So the ability to give up power for the greater good is a rare commodity. But when it happens, we all benefit. President Washington, for example, said he was only going to serve 2 terms because he believed it shouldn't be lifelong entitlement. There are a lot of things that we've learned along the way in this country about the basic building blocks of democracy. And if we lose this fight on campaign finance being one of them, then it diminishes democracy overall. And I think those that care about the public service aspect of democracy and the common good and the greater good goals that we have, and also know the influencing negative aspects of money in that process, that we should have some controls, right? That's all we're really arguing for here. Some control over that process so that we can honor the value of democracy. If we don't achieve that, we're in trouble down the road.
Speaking to corporate personhood, I know the McCutcheon case being an individual, it didn't come into play, but the Citizens United case happened because corporations having personhood. And as long as corporations and persons can use our Constitution and our Bill of Rights, it's going to be very difficult to make much change. So I think besides what we're talking about now, we need to also go to the issue of getting personhood taken away from corporations. And that's a very difficult process because the Supreme Court, some years back, declared them to be persons, and that's the final law of the land. So in order to take personhood away from corporations, you need to either get the Supreme Court to reverse their decision, or you need an amendment to the Constitution. And there is a very strong, getting stronger movement called Move to Amend that is working hard to get personhood taken away by amendment to the Constitution.
And Ken Sager spoke about that as an opening remarks. I don't know if you got here late.
No, I didn't.
But you should read Justice Breyer's remarks about that very aspect. He says with Citizens United and McCutcheon coupled together, it's only gotten worse. So that aspect of it is something that we have to keep in mind as well. We've got to explain to people the big picture. I think it's kind of a good opportunity for us to reinvigorate the idea that you can make a difference. One of my favorite quotes from Margaret Mead, famous sociologist, is that never doubt that a small group of thoughtful citizens can change the world. Indeed, that's all it ever was. Look at this room. You've got to grow the movement in order to make change. And so I'm happy to be a part of it.
And that's all of us, everyone that's in this room today, just needs to be committed as you can be to doing whatever you can do and be there when people like Jeff stand up for us, be there to back him, be there to carry his message farther, carry our own messages. We just all have to do this, and if each one of you will bring in one or two more, then we can make this work.
We're all in this together. What did Benjamin Franklin say when the founding fathers committed to creating the country? We all need to hang together or we'll hang separately. So we're in this together.
I think we sometimes feel comfortable in Iowa, though, that we do have a level-headed approach to a lot of this, especially in terms of redistricting and so forth. But I look at the Midwest too, and I think Wisconsin used to be that ideal place, and look what's going on there.
But for one vote.
Guess what?
One vote.
We are one vote away from Wisconsin. Iowans, pay attention. We are one vote away from Wisconsin. You change one of the state senators and the majority shifts. So we literally have no room for error. We're one vote away from Wisconsin. And what does that say then positively, I think, about the 6 years of progressive, thoughtful leadership in the Senate? It has mattered a lot.
Oh, yeah.
And we're literally one of the only chambers in the country from 2010 until now to maintain majority through Tea Party movement.
I think
And we have no room for errors, so keep that in mind. We're one vote away from Wisconsin.
you're making history. I think that this, when the history books are written, they'll write about this, how the Senate held things together. for our
I'm a little
states.
biased, but you're exactly right. Somebody needs to write a book about the Iowa Senate Democrat majority from really '06 all the way till now. We're literally the only chamber in the country that has maintained that majority through all the changes that we've all experienced. Tea Party, Citizens United, and Lord knows what's going to happen with the McCutcheon decision.
I think more so my fear with McCutcheon is that it supports those candidates that have been obstructionists. Because me, more so, I lean one side of the aisle or the other depending on the issue. I try to take each issue separately, which unfortunately doesn't happen often. That dialogue doesn't happen as much anymore. But my issue is the obstructionist that the Tea Party movement has created on the national level and has whipped the Republican Party around to their side of just not doing anything. And that's my worry with McCutcheon, is you'll see that all across all state legislatures, is you'll see that obstructionist, well, not going to do anything unless it's exactly what we want.
And it was the Koch brothers and big corporate money that got that Tea Party going and people elected.
And
There's that potential. Madison wrote about it in Federalist 10, talk about factions, and therefore they're not making decisions for the greater good. So they've turned the tools of democracy on its head, really, and been supercharged by the lack of any campaign finance laws. So we got to pay attention to that and explain it simply and thoughtfully to people who would make a difference and actually vote that way. So I think that's our challenge, and thank goodness we've got a democracy in order to do that, right? There's some
Not to
places,
mention those that would try to continue with the voter suppression all over the country.
there's some places in the world you don't get that chance at least, and we do. So it's up to us.
And it's up to us to stand up for people whose voting rights are being challenged too. If they're supposed to vote, then we need to make sure they can vote. So, yeah, I have a personal example to some extent. When I first moved to Iowa, I was more likely to support the moderate Republicans because I didn't know the Democrats that well. And I noticed that Tom Latham decided to step down from the federal House of Representatives, and I think he's just tired of the obstructionism and conflict and doesn't want to be a part of it anymore. And that's sad, because I think for many years he did a good job representing us. And whether you're Democrat or not, it doesn't matter. If we have good people in the Senate and House federally, we have good people at the state level, then you're going to get good things done for people. So,
As messengers of this movement, we have to grow it.
yes.
And therefore, our ability to communicate to Republicans and independents and all voters in the political spectrum, Green Party, our ability to be effective and communicate to them is going to matter. So we welcome everybody into this movement of campaign finance reform. And if it's a reason that you're voting, even better.
Absolutely.
Could you tell, you said we're one vote away in the Senate. Is there a lot of money coming in now to try to keep that, to keep the Senate leaning in the Democratic way?
Well, that's why we're here today. If you look at Citizens United and the McCutcheon decision, what we know is there will be more money and it will be secret. The two decisions together compound each other.
So you're not able to point out, most people don't know that. They think that we'd be able to just zero in and tell who's getting the money.
Well, I think we have a better chance in Iowa because of this
The lawsuits
that
that
we
are-
have. But,
We captured as much as we could, but since Citizens United, you've had 501 C4s and C6s and other super PACs who use their federal tax status to shield their political activities and claim that they're only education. So it's all gotten worse. Today's decision just means you pile more money onto it. So there will be a day not too far in the future where a candidate will almost be irrelevant because of the third-party secret money that can be used very similar to campaign ads. So you will see races where the candidate will almost become irrelevant. And that's a sad day.
For my international viewers, maybe this has, I don't know if this has been a topic of discussion, but what about the secret money from outside the U.S. coming in, like what was alleged with Mitt Romney?
Well, one of the reasons we wanted to pass our Iowa law specifically related to who we are. We're Iowans. We pick the president first. We're proud of that. We kick off that process. Without a law that called for complete disclosure, you won't know if some of that money comes from foreign governments or foreign citizens. So one of the reasons we wanted to pass that was to ensure that there was no loophole in that regard. I hope that more people pay attention to that aspect of it because much of our money is now going to become more secret because of Citizens United and McCutcheon, which actually amplifies how much more can be used. So Iowa, we passed that in the Senate, it wasn't taken up in the House. But that is an important aspect. I think there's almost 100% agreement that we don't want foreign money influencing U.S. elections. And where in a place like Iowa would that not be more important? Which is why I say my goal when I look at campaign finance is if we're going to be the first in the nation, we ought to be best in the nation when it comes to campaign finance laws. And that's an important aspect of it. So that was included in our bill.
Well, certainly thank you for your leadership.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you again.